My name is Beatrice, and I'm 63 years old. I always thought there was nothing worse than loneliness. But I was wrong. It turns out there's a pain that tears your heart apart, when your own children slam the door in your face, shutting you out of their lives. I don't feel at home anymore. I've lost everything. And not because of an accident or illness. No, it's all because of love. My maternal love. I dedicated my whole life to my children. I raised them alone, washing other people's laundry, cleaning houses, caring for the sick. I did everything so they could live better than I did. I never complained, never asked for anything in return. I only dreamed of seeing them happy and grateful. Not long ago, I gave them all my savings, the accumulation of my entire life. A huge sum, earned with sweat and blood, denying myself everything, no vacations, new clothes, entertainment. They bought a house with that money. I signed the papers, barely looking, trusting as always. I was told it would be our home, and I would have my own corner. At first, everything seemed wonderful, but gradually their voices lost their warmth. Then they fell silent altogether. One day I tried to call to warn them that I would be late, and I realized they had blocked me. On the phone, on the intercom, even on social media. When I came to the door, they didn't even open it. I heard them say to their daughter from inside that this lady no longer lived here. I became a shadow, an unwanted nuisance they wanted to get rid of, without looking me in the eye. I raised them alone, washing other people's laundry, cleaning houses, caring for the sick, all so they could have a better life than mine. I never complained, never asked for anything, only dreamed of seeing them successful and grateful. Recently, I gave them all my savings. A huge sum, accumulated over years without vacations, without new clothes, without the slightest luxury. They bought a huge house with that money. I, as always, trustingly signed the papers, barely looking. They kept telling me that it would be our shared home, that I would have my own corner. At first, everything seemed perfect, but gradually their voices lost their warmth. Soon, they stopped talking to me altogether. One day, trying to warn them that I would be late, I realized that they had blocked me everywhere. On the phone, on the intercom, even on social media. When I timidly knocked on the door, no one came out. Only their voices were heard from inside, explaining to their daughter that this lady no longer lived here. I seemed to have turned into a shadow, an annoying nuisance that they were trying to get rid of, avoiding a direct confrontation. That night I slept sitting in a bus station, the chilling cold went through my bones, but the emotional pain was unbearable. There, with a broken heart, I made myself a promise. If they so easily erased me from their lives, I would learn to close the doors of my heart. But they didn't know yet, the door that slammed shut behind me was the only barrier between them and the ruthless world. That night, curled up on the hard seat of the bus station, I felt the icy wind piercing my bones. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the gaping emptiness that had settled in my soul. It was there, in that corner of despair, that I made a vow to myself. If they so easily erased me from their lives, I would learn to slam the doors of my heart with such force that they could never enter. They didn't understand that the door they had just closed was the only one protecting them from the harsh reality. I always thought that with effort, affection would come on its own. I always believed that if I put in enough effort, love would come on its own. That the children would appreciate every sleepless night spent washing other people's floors, just so they could have a hot meal. But no one warns you that maternal love is not always returned. When their father left, my children were only 3 and 5 years old. He left no note, no explanation, only debts and a pair of worn-out shoes. I cried in silence so they wouldn't see my weakness, but I didn't give up. I took any job, cleaning in other people's houses from dawn until late at night. I remember how unbearably painful. My hands, exhausted from washing clothes on concrete slabs, seemed like steel. I was told that I was strong, but the truth is that I was only driven by fear. Fear of seeing the hungry eyes of my children, fear of appearing before them as a failure, fear of not giving them what they deserved. Every birthday, despite the meager income, I turned it into a celebration. My children never went to school without notebooks and textbooks. When my eldest son wanted to study computer science, I, without hesitation, sold my only gold ring to pay for his courses. When the youngest was struck by illness, I walked kilometers because I had no money for the bus or a private doctor. But I never complained. Isn't that the purpose of a mother? To endure and bear all the hardships. I now understand that I wasn't just erased from their lives from their phone contacts. This process started much earlier. Slowly, subtly, with each feigned instance of inattention, with every word cutting me off from discussions about important issues. And the worst part is that I allowed it, afraid of losing them. I couldn't imagine that they would still leave me, just do it their way, exquisitely and technologically, with the push of a button. Cowards. The money I gave them didn't fall from the sky. It's the result of years lived without vacations, without luxury, without a single free evening. I saved every coin, hid it in a tin behind the stove. When the tin filled up, I poured it into envelopes and buried them in old pillows. I didn't trust banks, only my own hands, because the only hands that never betrayed me are my own. In a notebook, I wrote down every expense, every saved cent. I told myself, this money is for old age. I always believed, if you put in the effort, love will come naturally. The children will appreciate every sunrise that I spent scrubbing other people's floors just so they could eat a hot meal. But no one warns you that a mother's love isn't always returned. When their father left, my children were only 3 and 5 years old. He left no note, no farewell glance, only debts and a pair of torn boots. I cried in silence, but I didn't break. I took any job I could get, cleaning other people's homes from dawn till dusk. I can still feel the aching pain in my hands. I remember how they burned after washing clothes in those cursed concrete troughs. Strong, people told me. Yes, of course, strong from desperation. The only thing that drove me then was a soul-chilling fear. The fear that my children would go hungry, that I would become a symbol of failure for them, that I wouldn't be able to give them a decent life. Not a single birthday went by without me turning myself inside out, pulling something out of thin air to celebrate it. Not once did they have to blush because of missing notebooks at school. And when my eldest son became passionate about computer science, I didn't hesitate to sell my only precious item, a gold ring, the last reminder of my youth, to pay for those courses. When my youngest had a stomach ache, I walked for miles, clenching my teeth, because my wallet was empty, and a private doctor was out of the question. But I never complained. Never. Isn't that what mothers are for? To endure, to be silent, and to pull the load. And now I understand. They didn't just delete my number from their phones. They've been erasing me from their lives for years. Slowly but surely. Every time they pretended not to hear my words, every time they dismissively said, "Mom, you don't understand anything." And the worst part is that I allowed it to happen, because I was deathly afraid of losing them. But I couldn't imagine that they would still abandon me, just do it their way, elegantly, digitally, and like the cowards they are. The money I gave them didn't fall from the sky. It was years spent without vacations, without the slightest luxury, without a single free evening. I saved every coin, hid it in a tin behind the stove, and when it was full to the brim, I poured everything into envelopes and buried them in my old pillows. I didn't trust banks, only my own hands, because the only ones who never betrayed me are my hands. In an old notebook, I wrote down every expense, every saved cent. I told myself that this money was for old age. But one day I realized that I already was. I didn't realize it because of wrinkles or the aching pain in my back in the mornings. I realized it when one of the women whose house I cleaned called me Donna Beatrice for the first time. That Donna crashed over me like a bucket of ice water. And that's when my children came to me with an idea. "Mom, what if we help you buy a house, and it will be yours too? You'll have your own room, you won't have to wander from rented apartment to rented apartment anymore," they chirped, showing me plans, showering me with sweet promises. Foolishly, I believed in this fairy tale. With trembling hands, I took out the envelopes, counted the money, and whispered, "Yes." I even helped them with the furniture, the refrigerator, and the mattresses. The day came to sign the papers. "Mom, don't read anything, just put your signature here." "It's just a formality," they assured me. I smiled, trusting the blood that I myself brought into the world. But when the notary said that everything was being registered in their names, a sharp pain pierced my chest. I wanted to object, but I knew that if I said a word, I would be considered crazy. I couldn't imagine how dearly this silence would cost me. The first days in the new house were quiet and peaceful. They gave me a small room in the back, next to the laundry room. I didn't complain. I thought, this is temporary. When the grandchildren are born, they'll definitely need me around. At first, I was invited to the table, though not often. Words, soon only fragments of words remained. One day I lingered at the farmer's market, and they had already had dinner without me. "Oh, we didn't know you were coming," they said casually. My name was used less and less, replaced by nicknames, the señora, she, the old woman. Even between themselves, they spoke about me in the third person, as if I wasn't even there. They no longer asked me to help with the bills, but cleaning became my direct responsibility. "Since you're home anyway, you could at least sweep." No. I never objected. On the contrary, I tried my best not to be a bother, but I still felt like an outsider in the house I had invested my savings in. But one day it dawned on me, I had grown old. It wasn't wrinkles or joint pain that told me this. No. I realized it when a certain señora, whose casas I cleaned, first called me Dona Beatriz. That dona crashed down on me like an ice-cold shower. And it was then that my children had the idea, "Mom, what if you help us buy a house? It'll be yours too. We'll give you your own room, you won't have to rent and wander around anymore." They unfolded colorful plans before me, generously scattering sweet words. And I, naive fool that I was, blinded by a dream, believed them unconditionally. With trembling hands, I took out the precious envelopes, counted every bill, and whispered the fateful word, yes. How enthusiastically I helped them furnish the nest, choosing furniture, scrutinizing the refrigerator, personally testing the mattresses. On the day of the signing, they didn't even let me look at the papers. "Mom, just scribble here, it's just a formality," they purred, my own flesh and blood. I smiled trustingly, believing in the unbreakable bond of kinship. But when the notary uttered the fateful words that all the property was being registered solely in their names, a sharp needle of doubt pierced my heart. I wanted to protest, but I imagined their looks, full of silent reproach, as if I were insane. I swallowed the insult, not suspecting the price I would pay for this silence. The first days in the new house breathed a quiet calm. They gave me a modest little room in the back, next to the laundry room. I didn't complain, convincing myself, this is temporary. When the grandchildren are born, they'll need me, I'll always be there. At first, I was still invited to the table, albeit without much conversation, but soon even that little bit disappeared. One day I lingered at the farmer's market, and they had already had dinner without me, leaving me outside the door of their happiness. "Oh, we didn't expect your visit," they said. They started calling me by my name less and less, using other words more often. The lady, the elder, even between themselves they spoke about me that way, as if I wasn't there. They stopped asking me to help with documents, but asked me to keep things tidy. "Since you're here, you could at least clean up." I tried to be helpful, but I still felt not quite right in a place where I had made my contribution. I noticed looks full of some discomfort when I spoke, heard quiet laughter when I asked something. One day I overheard a relative say that I had an unpleasant odor and that she was a little embarrassed when her acquaintances saw me. My son didn't reprimand her, just smiled. I kept quiet, trying to restrain my feelings, washing them down with a glass of water. Sometimes it seemed to me that my presence made them uncomfortable, and it was very unpleasant. One morning, while cleaning in the kitchen, I found my favorite mug broken in the trash can. No one said anything, as if this insignificant thing had no value, but for me that mug was a memory of the times when the three of us lived in a modest dwelling, shared simple food, and hoped for the best. I took it out of the container and held it in my hands, as if it were something precious to me. I noticed looks of some discomfort when I spoke, quiet conversations between them when I asked something. One day I overheard a relative say that I had an unpleasant odor and that she was embarrassed when her acquaintances saw me. My son didn't object to her, but just smiled. I kept quiet, trying not to show my feelings. Sometimes it seemed to me that my presence made them uncomfortable, and it was unpleasant. One morning, while cleaning in the kitchen, I found my favorite mug damaged among the waste. No one said anything, as if this little thing had no value, but for me that mug was from the time when the three of us lived in a small house, ate modestly, and dreamed of a better life. I found it and held it close, as if it were the only thing I had left. I didn't know that I would soon be deprived of that too. Soon the house stopped feeling like a home and turned into a cage. The door to the room where I slept started creaking, but no one wanted to fix it. "You hardly ever go out anyway," my son said dismissively. Meals became separate. Sometimes I got leftovers, sometimes not even that. I got used to reheating cold rice and pretending that my stomach didn't hurt and that I wasn't sad. One day I overheard them talking about a trip to the coast. They booked a hotel, bought vacation supplies, and took pictures, laughing in the garden. I wasn't invited. "It's for couples," they told me. Nevertheless, I looked after my daughter-in-law's dog while they were gone. The very same dog that slept on a more comfortable mattress than me. They left me instructions on sticky notes, as if I were their assistant. "Feed her at 8. Bathe her on Saturday. Don't touch her often." The worst was yet to come. Shortly after that, I started experiencing discomfort in my pelvic area. It became harder to get up. I saw a doctor, and they prescribed medication. When I asked for help in purchasing it, my son expressed discontent. He said he was tired of my health complaints and constant requests for money. I remained silent, feeling sadness. It wasn't about the medication, but about feeling useless for the first time. I didn't know that the situation would become even more difficult over time. My home stopped being a cozy place and turned into something like an enclosed space. The door to my room creaked, but no one rushed to repair it. My son noticed that I hardly ever left my room. Meals became a separate issue. Sometimes I got leftovers, and sometimes not even that. I got used to reheating cold rice and tried not to pay attention to the discomfort. One day, I overheard them discussing a trip to the coast. They booked a hotel, bought everything they needed, and happily took pictures in the garden. I wasn't invited. "This is an event for couples," they said. Nevertheless, I looked after my daughter-in-law's pet while they were away. A pet that seemed very comfortable. They left me notes with instructions, as if I were a housekeeper. "Feed at 8. Perform hygiene procedures on Saturday. Do not disturb unnecessarily." Then the difficulties arose. I started experiencing discomfort in my hip area. It was difficult for me to move. I saw a doctor, and they prescribed medication. When I asked for assistance in purchasing it, my son expressed dissatisfaction. "Again with these health issues," he said. "Can't you ask for financial help less often?" I remained silent, feeling sadness, not so much because of the medication, but because of the realization that perhaps I had become a burden. That same evening, when I tried to call him from the room, I discovered that my number no longer appeared on his device, as if I had been restricted from contacting him. I checked social media and the intercom, but to no avail. The screen simply displayed a message about restricted access. I was denied. Then I realized that this wasn't a technical malfunction. The door was close to me, and not just physically. I was seemingly turned off, as if I were a switch. I spent hours outside that house that evening, sitting on a bench with a hunched back and trembling hands. I quietly knocked on the door, without making a sound. No one answered. Not even him. The lights came on. I heard voices inside, even laughter, but for me, everything was silent. I slowly got up, my knees cracking, and walked, not knowing where. I had nowhere to go. I had no one left. Eventually, I fell asleep on a bench at a bus station. I hugged my bag like a shield. I thought, it will all pass tomorrow. They'll call me. but the phone was silent. Days passed, the block continued, no messages, no explanations. In my head, their childhood faces repeated, their voices calling me mom. But now I only saw their backs, moving away, closing doors, not looking back. That same night, when I tried to call him from the living room, I realized that my number no longer rang on his cell phone. I had been blocked. I tried to contact them through available channels, but to no avail. The electronic device displayed a message about restricted access. It became clear that this wasn't an accident. Communication was severed, and it felt like the sudden cessation of something important. That evening, I spent some time outside, on the street, sitting on a bench. I quietly knocked, trying not to attract attention. There was no answer. Inside the house, the lights were on, voices could be heard, but for me, everything was as if in silence. I slowly got up and walked, not knowing where I was going. I felt very lonely. Eventually, I fell asleep on a bench in a transportation waiting area, hugging my bag tightly. I hoped that the situation would change, that they would contact me. But the phone remained silent. Several days passed, and communication was never restored, without any explanation. I remembered moments from the past, voices and faces. Now I only saw their backs, moving away, closing doors, not looking back. I sold my phone to pay for inexpensive lodging for a few nights. I had a little money left, but more than worrying about food, I was worried about the feeling of awkwardness. How do you explain that your own children have distanced themselves from you? How do you tell someone about it without experiencing severe emotional discomfort? I looked in the mirror of the shared bathroom and barely recognized my eyes. They looked tired, hollow, full of questions that seemed to have no answers. In this quiet corner, sipping a warm drink from a paper cup, I heard a voice that made me look up. "Beatrice, is that you?" It was Mabel, a friend from my youth whom I hadn't seen in years. She hugged me without asking questions. "What happened?" she asked. And although it was difficult for me, I held back my emotions and spoke the first truth. My children have stopped talking to me." Mabel took me to her home without asking any more questions. She lived in a small room, a simple but clean place with an extra bed where I could rest and start putting myself back together. She made me a hot broth, like in the old days, and as I tasted it, I felt the years weighing down on me. I cried with the spoon in my hand. Not because of the soup. I cried because of myself, because of everything I had kept inside for so long. In the following days, she insisted that I tell her everything. I told her about the finances, about the housing, about how I signed papers without reading them, about how I went from being a mother to a burden. Mabel listened to me with restrained anger, as if she had heard too many similar stories. "You're not the first, but it's not too late to not let yourself be used anymore," she said, looking straight at me. "The housing is in their name." I nodded. "But the money was yours." I felt hope again. Then she told me about an acquaintance lawyer who helped elderly women in similar situations, who had been used by their own families. "I didn't have much money to pay him, but Mabel," he said, "he gets paid when we succeed." He handed me a card. That night I held it in my hand as if it were a talisman. I had little to lose, but much to recover, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. I sold my phone to pay for a few nights in a cheap hostel. I had a little money left, but more than worrying about hunger, I was worried about feeling awkward. How to explain that loved ones had created such a situation? How to talk about it without feeling deeply emotionally disturbed? I looked at myself in the mirror of the shared bathroom and hardly recognized myself. My gaze was tired, deep-set, full of questions that were difficult to answer. In this quiet place, as I drank a warm drink from a plastic cup, I heard a voice that made me look up. "Beatrice, is that you?" It was Mabel, an acquaintance from the past whom I hadn't seen for many years. She hugged me without asking any more questions. "What happened to you?" she asked. And although it was difficult for me to speak, I tried to calm down and said the first thing that came to mind. My children have distanced themselves from me." Mabel invited me to her place without asking any more questions. She lived in a modest but cozy room with an extra bed where I could recover and sort out my thoughts. She made me a warm broth, a recipe I had known for a long time, and as I tasted it, I felt the past reminding me. I cried, holding the spoon. Not because of the broth. I cried because of myself, because of what I had kept inside for so long. In the following days, she suggested that I share my experiences. I told her about financial matters, about housing, about how I signed documents without going into details, about how I stopped being a support and became dependent. Mabel listened to me with quiet indignation, as if she had heard similar stories many times. "You're not the only one, but you still have the opportunity to change the situation," she said, looking me in the eye. "The housing now belongs to them." I nodded, "But you provided the funds." I felt hope again. That's when she told me about a lawyer she knew, a specialist who provided support to older people who found themselves in a difficult situation with relatives. I didn't have enough funds to pay right away, but Mabel said, "Payment is made after the result is achieved." She gave me a card. That night I held it in my sleep, as if it were a talisman. I had almost nothing to lose, but there was something to recover, not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a desire for justice. The next day I went to him. Lawyer Walter listened carefully to my situation without interrupting. At the end he just said, "We can start working immediately." He explained that even if the property was not in my name, there were ways to prove that the funds belonged to me. It was necessary to collect confirmations, testimonies, any traces. And just as I was leaving his office with hope in my heart, Mabel's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end worried me. "Beatrice, we need to discuss something. It's important." It was the voice of my eldest son after several weeks of silence, after a period of estrangement. Now he was asking for a conversation. I didn't know what to say. She could only answer with a curt "Why?" A dry "what for" escaped from a secluded corner, like an echo of past experiences. A long silence followed in response. Then, in a voice trying to remain calm, came, "Something happened to the house? We need you to come." The next day, I went to the appointment. The legal specialist listened attentively to my story, without interrupting. At the end, he said, "We can start working on this issue soon." He explained that, although the house was not in my name, there were ways to prove my financial contribution. I needed to gather the relevant documents, find witnesses, and provide any supporting data. And just as I was leaving his office with a glimmer of hope, the phone rang. The call came from an unknown number, but the voice on the other end made me wary. "Beatrice, we need to discuss something. It's important." It was the voice of my eldest son, after a period of silence, no contact, avoidance. Now he was asking to talk. I was confused. The only thing I could say was a dry "what for," which escaped from the depths of my soul. In response, silence reigned on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice that tried to sound calm, he said, "Something happened to the house? We need you to come." I hung up without answering. I stared at the phone as if it had exploded. Mabel saw that I had turned pale, as if I had seen a ghost. I told her what had happened. She crossed her arms and frowned. "They're in trouble. That's for sure. And now that things are looking bad, they need you again. They need your help." I didn't want to create illusions. I knew it wasn't love, but interest, as always. But I also knew that if I played my cards right, I could get back what once belonged to me. That night, I didn't sleep. I hesitated between going and facing that house again, or letting them drown without me. At dawn, I decided I would go, not to help them, but to see with my own eyes what ruins they had turned what was once my home into. I put on the best clothes I had. I combed my hair and went out with my head held high. This time, I wasn't going as a submissive mother, but as a conscious woman. When I arrived, I noticed something strange. The windows were open, but there was no sound. I knocked on the door. My daughter-in-law opened it, with puffy eyes and a pale face. They took the car and blocked the account, she said, without greeting me. I looked at her without blinking. And what does that have to do with me? Then my son appeared in the hallway, nervous, and said a phrase that made me uneasy. Mom, it seems someone is claiming ownership of the house. My son didn't know that the person claiming the house was me. I told Walter, the lawyer, as soon as I got out of there. They're going to start fussing, I said. He smiled slightly. He explained that he had already started the legal procedure with documents proving the origin of the funds used in the purchase, deposit receipts, contracts from my previous job, everything pointed to the truth. I paid for that house. I hung up without answering. I stared at the phone as if it had surprised me. Mabel saw me slightly upset. I shared with her what happened. She crossed her arms over her chest and expressed concern. They're having difficulties. That's all. And now that the situation has become complicated, you are important to them again. They need you. I tried not to raise my hopes too high. I understood that it wasn't affection, but rather interest, as usual. But I also understood that if I used the situation correctly, then, starting tomorrow, we will begin the process of reviewing the agreement. I smiled slightly. The situation was starting to change in a favorable way, but I didn't expect the events that followed. The next morning, checking my mail, I found a letter with a familiar handwriting, signed daughter-in-law. The letter was concise, written in uneven handwriting, as if each word was difficult to write. Beatrice, I know that we have a difficult relationship, but for everyone's sake, we should discuss some issues. There are aspects that your son has not told you. I folded the letter and put it on the table. This was not a surprise. When difficulties arise, some seek to distance themselves, but if she wants to discuss the situation, this time the meeting will be on my terms. I received an offer to meet at an agreed location. I chose a small cafe, believing that it would provide some privacy. She appeared on time, alone, dressed quite simply. She sat down, keeping her back straight, and lowered her gaze. I'm not here to ask for anything, she began. I came with a warning. It seems your son has certain plans. They concern your property and your ability to dispose of it. Her words sounded serious, but didn't cause me panic. She recounted that he might be consulting with lawyers about assessing your decision-making capacity and that he may be exploring options for gaining control over your assets. I overheard conversations suggesting that your current situation might be used as an argument to justify taking over your affairs. I looked at her, feeling a mix of disappointment and gratitude. Disappointment because it wasn't entirely unexpected, and gratitude for clarifying the situation. Leaving the cafe, I resolved to take steps to protect my interests. I sought an independent medical assessment to confirm my ability to make decisions independently. Then, I prepared documents expressing my intention to safeguard my assets and ensure my wishes were honored. Everything was documented. That evening, I went to sleep feeling relieved. But the next morning, Walter called me, worried. Beatrice, your son has contacted a lawyer. They are serious. Walter's call caught me over my morning coffee as I looked at the plants in my new yard, but his tone made me tense. They are building a case based on the idea that you used influence to acquire assets to which you were not entitled. I felt a surge, a mixture of indignation and annoyance. Influence. Me, who had done so much for them. Now I am portrayed in a negative light. The new lawyer they contacted is known for his persistence. They want to present me in a bad light, wear me down, make me feel uncomfortable, but this time they won't be able to hide me. I told Walter that I was ready for any development. Let them provide any arguments, because when it comes to objectivity, I have something to say. We started collecting information, invoices, correspondence, images, testimonies from people around us. Information about this situation was soon to become known. At the same time, their position was deteriorating. I learned from mutual acquaintances that they had used the property as collateral to meet financial obligations and were now having difficulty making regular payments. Paradoxically, the desired funds proved inaccessible to them. They lacked management skills, empathy, and appreciation. Their actions often boiled down to requests, demands, and accusations, but now they had no way to shift responsibility to others. After a while, I received official notice of a preliminary hearing regarding a dispute over property matters. The document was drawn up by the relevant institution. I took a deep breath, prepared, and gathered the necessary materials. It was time to present my side of the story, but in the courtroom, an unexpected twist awaited me. One of those present expressed concern and reported, "Beatrice, the other party has presented witnesses whose testimony may be inaccurate." Hearing this, I was deeply shocked. Walter reported that two people had been brought in, claiming to have previously worked with Eleanor, and claiming that I had influenced her in making her will. One of them even claimed to have observed me controlling her medication intake. How easily facts can be distorted when there is an interest in material gain, and how costly it can be to someone who adheres to the truth. The situation became tense in the courtroom. My son's lawyer spoke as if I were prone to manipulation. I was presented as someone who took advantage of the condition of a sick person. I listened to what was happening with emotion, but remained calm. I wasn't going to show weakness in front of them. Not anymore. Not after all the trials. When it was my turn, I stood up. I spoke clearly, restrainedly, without hostility, but truthfully. I told about Eleanor, about our communication, about the books I read to her, about my visits with her to medical facilities, and then presented a video recording. Testimony recorded by her shortly before her death, where she said in a quiet voice, "Everything I have is for Beatrice. I have no close relatives, but she was the only one who treated me with respect until the very end." The room went silent. The judge asked for time to review the case files. We left the building with hope, although inside I felt tired, but not disappointed. I believed that justice would prevail. That evening, during dinner, I received a message from an unknown number. It was an image. It showed two young people in front of my old house, now empty, with a "property for sale, open house" sign. The sight of this announcement caused me sadness, but also some relief. The house that was taken from me by deception was now to pass to others. It was no longer a symbol of home, it was a reflection of their unreasonable aspirations. They wanted too much, and now they risk losing everything, and most importantly, they won't be able to blame me. The next day, an acquaintance confirmed the information. The debt turned out to be too large. The financial institution seized the collateral. The house will be put up for auction. I just silently agreed. I felt neither joy nor sadness about what had happened. It seemed like a logical outcome of the situation. "If you decide to participate in the procedure," Walter said quietly to me, "we will have the opportunity to return this property within the law and register it in your name." I considered this offer and smiled slightly. That same day, I began to take the necessary actions. I sold some of the interior items that I had inherited from Eleanor. I transferred some of my savings and prepared all the required documents. This time I intended to act not as a victim, but as an interested party. I arrived at the event in modest clothes, with an impassive expression and a complete set of documents. My sons were absent. They apparently accepted the outcome of the matter. I, on the other hand, was completing a certain stage. When the decision was made and the authorized representative announced that the right of ownership was transferred to me, I did not feel any delight, only a sense of satisfaction. I was handed the keys, as the first time, but this was not a beginning, it was a return, a kind of confirmation that what was created with good intentions cannot simply be taken away. But the unexpected moment happened later. Returning home, I found a man waiting at the entrance. It was not one of my sons, it was my ex-husband. I recognized him immediately, although the years had left their mark and changed his appearance. He stood in front of my house, holding an old hat in his hands, and looked with the same apprehension as before. "Beatrice," he said. "I needed to talk to you." I remained silent, crossing my arms. He left first, and now he appeared as if nothing had happened. "I heard that you are doing well, that you have your own house, that your sons are facing difficulties." His voice was quiet, as if he hoped for understanding. But I was no longer the young girl who grieved over his departure. I had become a woman who had learned to cope with life's challenges. "And what do you need? Tea? Explanations?" I asked restrainedly. He lowered his eyes. "I didn't come for myself, but for them. Your sons are not having an easy time. They are in a difficult situation. They were looking for me. They have no one but me." These words affected me more than I expected. Not because of the mention of my sons, but because of the realization of the truth. They hurt me, disrespected me, distanced themselves from me, but they are still my family. They made the decision to leave. "No," I replied to him. "And you believe I will help them again?" He sighed. "No, but I believe you are more generous than they think." I was silent. I realized that this was not deception, and it stung me. I went inside without saying goodbye. I quietly closed the door. I sat in a chair and stared at the photograph of Eleanor. She, not being a relative, gave me what was missing in my relationship with my children. I reflected on the past, on what had been lost and gained. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I got up and opened the door. It was my sons, the elder with reddened eyes, the younger with a drooping head, and both simultaneously said, "Mom, forgive us." I looked at them for a long time, maintaining silence. It was not the first time I had heard a request for forgiveness, but for the first time I did not feel the need to accept it. My silence made them anxious. "We realize that we made mistakes, Mom, that we upset you, that we were inattentive," said the elder. The younger was quietly crying. "We have faced difficulties, Mom. Loss of property, financial difficulties, anxiety." I nodded, not out of sympathy, but out of understanding, because everything they said was true. "I don't feel animosity towards you," I told them, "but I don't feel the need for your presence either." They looked with some bewilderment, as if expecting an invitation, a display of warmth, a repetition of the former relationship. But now everything is different. My life is no longer subject to striving for approval, I live for myself. And this does not involve returning to those who terminated communication on their own initiative. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and freed myself from the burden of past years. I offered support, but not a resumption of previous relationships. I expressed no desire to cause harm or demand retribution, only a desire to maintain distance. They made the decision to end communication, and now I am making the decision not to resume it. Go your own way. I have already found mine and do not want to lose it. They left without insisting. There were no emotional outbursts, only a quiet awareness of change. That evening, I allowed myself to relax a little and looked at the city from the balcony. I smiled, because I could finally say it without fear, remorse, or hesitation. I ended communication with them for personal reasons. They stopped communicating with me, also based on their own considerations.